Hey guys, it's Loony here. I figured I would make an introductory video explaining the basics of playing a Discipline Priest. This is mostly targeted towards Raid, and it's mostly for beginner players. If you are a more advanced player, then I will be coming up with a guide in the future explaining things in more detail. I just recall how overwhelming getting into the spec can be, so I figured this would help ease the learning curve. A little bit about me. I am I'm in a mythic raiding guild, and I do a lot of keys. I'm currently ranked number one Discipline Priest in the biggest alliance server on NA, so I hopefully am able to provide you with some help to get into the spec. So, as an introduction, for anything that for if you want to be up to date with anything that is happening with regards to Discipline Priests, then I would highly suggest going to Warcraft Priests, which is a great website where you can find everything up to date, and there are great people who are writing the guides over there. Also, there's the Discipline Priest Discord, or just the Priest Discord in general. The people in the Discipline channel are incredibly helpful, so if you have any questions, please feel free to join there and ask the people there as well. They are incredible. So I'll drop the link in the description of this video just so that you can join the either Warcraft Priests and read whatever is on there, and also the Discord itself. Okay, so let's get into the basics of Discipline Priests. Why would you play Discipline Priests over other healers? Well, there are three distinct advantages that you get with Discipline Priests. One of them is you do passive damage. Damage is actually part of your healing rotation. And there's also atonement because of the way the damage gets transferred into healing on the people with atonement, which I will be discussing later. Discipline Priest also has powerful damage reduction cooldowns that can help your raid survive certain mythic mechanics that would otherwise kill everyone. And finally, we currently have Spirit Shell, even though it has been nerfed multiple times since the beginning of Shadowlands. It is effectively a way for you to increase the effective health of your raid. So it really helps with ensuring that you can survive really difficult mechanics. Now, Discipline Priests themselves are proactive healers, which means that you need to be ready before the damage happens. Now, ideally, all healers should be ready for the damage before it happens. However, they're not punished as much as Discipline Priests are when they're not ready for the damage. We have a really hard time catching up once we've fallen behind on our damage. We heal through something called Atonement, which is a buff that we applied on our target once we cast Power Word Shield on them, or Shadow Mend. This buff lasts for 15 seconds if you use those spells, during which 50% of the damage you do to your current target gets transferred to healing on the people with Atonement. Your AoE Atonement applier is Power Word Radiance. It hits 5 targets, and the Atonement will last on them for 9 seconds as opposed to the 15 seconds. So, as a quick TLDR, the way Discipline Priests work in a raid environment is applying Atonement on allies, then doing damage to boss. And that way, you're able to heal your allies as well. Now, our Atonement appliers cost a lot of mana, and our damaging spells do not. Let's get into the talents and builds involved with Discipline Priests. So, for starters, when it comes to raiding, you will almost always pick Schism. The second one is more really up to you. I personally like Angelic Feather because it gives us mobility, and our class in general is not the most mobile. And then next you have Solace, which is quite a lot of mana over the course of a fight, and we tend to struggle with mana at times. So this is a very good way of ensuring that we get mana back. Next, once again, you can really pick whatever you want. I personally like Shining Radiance, but you really won't be using it much during Raid to begin with. So feel free to pick whatever you want or you're most comfortable with. I could speak more about this with regards to Mythic Plus, but that will be in another video. Next is Sins of the Many. This is your go-to pick regardless. And then some people talk about Halo with regards to that line. I personally prefer Purge the Wicked, and lots of people prefer Purge the Wicked. In fact, if you go on the logs, almost everyone picks Purge the Wicked because of how much damage it does and how easy the damage is. Now, with regards to the last row, this is fight dependent whether you go Evangelism or Spirit Shell. I will be talking more about this later during this guide and explaining how the different ramps are for them. Now, when it comes to our secondaries, It's important to know that you shouldn't be avoiding any secondary in particular. All of our secondaries are extremely close to one another, and you won't exactly feel punished by having more of a certain secondary over another. The most important thing is your eye level, specifically your intellect. Intellect is our best stat by all means, so eye level gains are always going to be primary and always prioritize that. But it's also important to know what your secondaries do. So, for starters, you have haste. Haste is a really nice secondary to have, with all eye levels being equal, that is, and it tends to be the one that I personally enjoy stacking. It speeds up our cast time and decreases the duration of our global cooldown, so we can apply atonements faster and deal more damage over a certain period of time, before the atonement buff falls off of our allies. Next is Critical Strike. This is a nice damage and healing increase. Since we spend most of our time dealing damage, Critical Strike is also pretty nice to have. Next is Versatility. It's a nice boost to our damage once again, but it also increases our healing and survivability. Discipline priests or priests in general are not the most durable of classes, so having this is pretty nice in general. And finally, you have Mastery. Mastery is the only one out of the secondaries that is a pure healing increase. It's not a bad stat, as the more mastery you have, you are able to do more healing to people who have atonement on them. But it offers no advantage in terms of damage. It's not a bad stat, and in fact, many people think that it's good to have during grades. Now, that is completely up to you, but what really matters the most when it comes to your gearing is to always go for the highest item level. With all item levels being equal, I personally like haste, but none of the stats are particularly bad. Next, let's talk about covenants. So, there are really only two options for people playing Discipline Priest. It's either Kyrian or Venthyr. Now, if you're either Necrolord or Night Fae, you're honestly better off playing Holy, because I don't personally play Holy, but from my understanding, is Holy doesn't really care much about the Covenant that they go, because they're just doing well regardless. However, for Discipline Priests, you really want to be either Kyrian or Venthyr. Right now, for 9.1, Kyrian is the preferred Covenant due to the strength of Boon of the Ascended, and the fact that we can decrease its cooldown on some fights by equipping the Kyrian Legendary and using the last trait of the Mechanicus Soulbind. Pelagos will be our go-to Soulbind at the start of the tier due to the increase in mastery each time we cast Boon of the Ascended, and will probably be our go-to even later in the tier. Using Mechanicos will be situational. Now, if you're a person who does not want to deal with the increased complexity of ramping with Boon of the Ascendant, then you can go Venthyr. Mind Games is perfectly fine, and it's still usable in many situations. But once again, if you're any other Covenant, you're probably better off playing Holy. When it comes to our Legendaries, Clarity of Mind is going to be our go-to Legendary when it comes to raiding, and it should be crafted on the ring slot. This is because domination sockets are going to land on our other slots anyway, and this will not conflict with our legendary. So just Clarity of Mind is your number one priority to craft if you're going to raid. Now, if you're Kyrian, you also have another legendary that you can use, which is Spheres of Harmony. And the way that legendary works is it decreases the cooldown on Boon of the Ascended, and it should be crafted on your pants slot. Now, depending on the fight, we'll be using a different legendary, but as the standard go-to, Clarity of Mind should definitely be the first one that you craft, if you don't have it yet. Clarity of Mind goes on the ring, Spheres of Harmony goes on the pants. Okay, let's discuss the general big cooldowns that Discipline Priests have during grade and really just in general. Power Word Barrier is one of our biggest abilities, and it offers a 25% damage reduction to anyone who is standing in the barrier. Use this ability when a boss is about to do a lot of damage and you can cover a fair portion of your raid. This ability will likely be planned by your raid leader. If it's not, use your own judgment on when it should be used. Next, there is Pain Suppression. It's one of the strongest damage reduction cooldowns in the game and can be applied on another target. Use it on someone who's taking a lot of incoming damage. Do not hesitate to use it on yourself if you're in danger, though, because if you're dead, you'll do no healing regardless. But if a tank is taking a lot of damage and they don't have any defensives, they might call for one. Feint Suppression is a very powerful one. Now, for your personal defensive, there's Desperate Prayer. Use it when you're in trouble. It's a 1.5-minute cooldown, so whenever you feel like you're in trouble, just pop it. It's not a big deal. Next, you have Fade. With the Conduit, you're able to get 9% damage reduction for the first couple of seconds once you use Fade. It's very useful if you know the incoming damage is happening in a second or two to just pop Fade. It's off the global cooldown, so it really doesn't even cost anything to cast it. So it's not a bad ability to have. Finally, there's Rapture / Spirit Shell / Evangelism. I'll be covering those in the next section, which is ramping. But those are your very big cooldowns. Okay, next, let's talk about ramping. Ramping is our main source of healing during a raid. What it essentially means is we set up before the damage happens from the boss, and we dump all of our resources into that window to heal or shield our allies back up. We repeat that each time our cooldowns are back up and available. Our ramps will change depending on our choice in the last talent show and the boss fight. So we have Evangelism or Spiritual. Different bosses will require different ramp times, and each one will have a different ability that we have to prepare for. This is why Discipline Priests typically do better the longer the tier is out, as more information is available on the timers. Let's talk about the Evangelism ramp. So Evangelism is the last talent that you may be picking on some fights, and it extends your atonement on targets by 6 seconds. So you want to make sure that the damage that you do lands as the boss is attacking you. So if you're Kyrian, that would be Ascended Blast. If you're Venthyr, that would be Schism. You want to make sure that you time it specifically where the boss hits the entire raid really hard, and then that is when your abilities start hitting the boss. That way, you're able to heal everybody who has Atonement up on them. So the way the ramp works is you refresh Purge the Wicked on the target, and you pop your Trinket if it requires activation time, things like Imperial Ordnance or Soul Letting Ruby. Next, you apply individual atonements on as many people as you can with regards to your haste and whatever the incoming damage profile is. Remember, the 2 ways of applying individual atonements is Power Word Shield, so you'd use that if your allies are at full health, or Shadow Mend. You would use that if your allies are missing health. If you need to be on the move, then you can just use Power Word Shield. Next, you would go into both of your charges of Power Word Radiance. After that, you pop Evangelism, Racial, and any on-use trinket that does not require activation time. And then, if you're Kyrian, you use Boon of the Ascended, and immediately Ascended Blast. Followed by Schism, then Ascended Blast, Nova Nova Blast, Nova Nova Blast, Nova Nova Blast, until you're done with that. Now, if you're Kyrian, you would start in the exact same way, but the change occurs after activating Evangelism, during which you will Schism into Mind Games, into Penance, Mind Blast, Solace, and then Smite, 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 Smite. Next is the Spiritual ramp. Now, while you're spec'd into Spiritual, you forego the ability to use Rapture because it replaces that spell. However, the spell allows you to effectively give your entire raid up to an additional bar of health. So it's just more health, so more effective health, which means that people are more likely to survive incoming mechanics. And you'll be using this talent quite a bit, possibly even more than Evangelism. But do stay up to date with which bosses are requiring which talent. So the ramp here is less finicky with the timings of Spiritual, because the way Spiritual works is you're providing a 10-second shield after your last instance of damage on your allies who had Atonement on them. However, the spell sequence is slightly different and a bit more complicated than Evangelism. So the way it works is you refresh Purge the Wicked on the target, and once again, pop your Trinket if it requires activation time, like Imperial Ordnance or Soul Letting Ruby, and then you go back to casting 79 or even more individual atonements, or maybe even less, depending on your haste and the incoming damage. Then you go into 1 Power Word Radiance, then you activate your Boon of the Ascended, and you activate your Spirit Shell plus Ascended Blast, which should be macroed together, into another Power Word Radiance, and then Ascended Blast again, Schism, Ascended Blast, then you go back into Nova Nova Blast, Nova Nova Blast. The reason you do this is because you want the final Ascended Eruption to land within your spiritual window, which will refresh any shielding that might have been depleted as you were in the middle of your ramp. Now, bear in mind that Boon of the Ascended is a 3-minute cooldown without including your legendary or the final trait from Mechanicos. Due to the cooldown Boon of the Ascended, you will only be able to do this ramp every other time you have Spiritual, which is a 1.5-minute cooldown. On other ramps, you would instead you'd start out the exact same way, except you would pop Shadow Fiend with your after your Evangelism or Spiritual, followed by Schism, Penance, Mind Blast, Solace, and then you spam Smite. This might be different based off of which legendary you're using and the mechanic of Soulbind, but the general concept is it still stands. You go back to applying individual atonements after refreshing your Purge the Wicked, followed by Spiritual into Shadow Fiend, Schism, Penance, Mind Blast, Solace, and then spamming Smite. I will have a little cheat sheet up here for you guys to be able to see which spells you're casting and hopefully be able to follow through with it. Now, when we're running Spheres, which is the Kyrian legendary, the ramp looks slightly different because clicking Spiritual will no longer extend the duration of our atonement, which is what Clarity of Mind would do. Now, with Spheres, the way the ramp would look like is you refresh Purge the Wicked of the target, pop your trinket if it requires activation time, do your single target atonements, followed by Boon of the Ascended, into Spiritual plus Ascended Blast macro, into your first Power Word Radiance, Ascended Blast, a second Power Word Radiance, Ascended Blast, Schism, and then back into Ascended Blast, Nova, Nova Blast, Nova, Nova Blast. What do we do when we're not ramping? Well, that's where our mini ramps come in. If you're running Evangelism and it's on cooldown, then something you can do is use your Rapture, because that does not get replaced by Evangelism. You get to have both. What you can do is you can Rapture on your allies, plus Power Word Shield, however many you think are going to be taking damage. And then you can use either 1 to 2 Radiance charges, followed by Schism, and then your damaging ability. So once again, Penance, Mind Blast, Solace, and then Smite. And that's a smaller ramp that you can have between your bigger ramps. But it really is dependent on the incoming damage profile. Sometimes you want to hold your second Radiance charge for another form of incoming damage. It's very dependent on the fight in general, which is why it's really important to know the fight damage profile of the fight. Now, if you're running Spiritual, you can simply just apply 4 to 5 atonements, followed by 2 Radiance charges, and then Schism into your damaging CDs. Outside of a ramp and a mini ramp, really what I personally suggest is just maintaining Purge the Wicked on your target at all times, so that would be the boss, and then using Penance and Solace on cooldown. Penance barely costs any mana, and Solace actually gives you mana back, so you do want to use that ability on cooldown, because it's quite a lot of mana over the course of the fight. Save Mind Blast for any ramps or mini ramps, just because that damaging spell, unlike every other damaging spell that we have, costs way too much mana for the amount of damage that it does. Also remember that it is not your job to spot heal. Leave the other healers something to do. So we are not that good at keeping people up if we need to spam heal them, especially with Shadow Mend or even Power Word Shield, because that costs a lot of mana. And other healers are punished less by doing that. So do keep that in mind. Okay, and if you made it this far, thank you so much. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment and I'll try my best to get back to you. This is once again, this was a very basic guide. I can make something a lot more advanced if people require. Alternatively, feel free to join my Discord and show me a message if you have any questions. If the next video isn't out yet, I'll leave a link in the description. I also have a Mythic Plus guide in the works. I have a lot more experience playing in Mythic Plus. So I'm waiting to personally try out all the new affixes for 9.1 before giving people advice on what to pick. Subscribe and hit the bell icon so you're notified when the new video is out. And cheers!